welcome to The Extras, where we take you behind the scenes of your favorite TV shows, movies, and animation, and their release on digital, DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K, or your favorite streaming site. I'm Tim Millard, your host. Well, today's episode is a real treat for all of you animation fans out there, and especially for those of you who collect the Looney Tunes releases. As announced in our previous May release podcast, the Warner Archive is releasing the new Looney Tunes Collector's Choice Volume 1 on Blu-ray on May 30th. And we're lucky today to have George Feltenstein of the Warner Archive and animation historian Jerry Beck on the podcast to talk about this release. George and Jerry provide a fascinating background on the history of Looney Tunes releases on physical media and their pivotal roles in bringing these great short films to the home video market. I think you'll find this story interesting as a backdrop to the current release, and I know I found it extremely informative to understand the timeline of all of the Looney Tunes releases over the years. They also talk about the importance of collectors and fans to the process of finding and funding both present and future preservation efforts. This is all terrific background leading up to what is on this current release. And we avoid any spoilers in this episode so that you can enjoy this release the way it was intended. So here are George and Jerry. Well, hi, George. Jerry, it's great to have you on the podcast to talk some Looney Tunes.
Yeah, we love it.
Wonderful to be here, Tim, as always.
Well, I know that when this announcement came out for this Collector's Choice Volume 1, the interest for that announced podcast and then on the Facebook page, just went through the roof. There's just been such an appetite, I think, for some classic animation ever since that last Tex Avery Volume 3 release that we talked about. Oh man, was that a year and a half ago? So I'm just curious, when was this kind of the genesis of this volume begun? And how did that kind of begin for you in terms of were you working on this during Tex Avery, or how did that all start?
This was later, and because there's been really quite significant changes in restructuring within our parent company, within Warner Brothers, within home entertainment, and within the last few years, there have been radical changes in organization, responsibilities, roles, so forth and so on. And it had always been my hope that we could open the door with Looney Tunes. I saw that it was somewhat being not given the proper due. Now, for a long time, Warner Archive was kind of told, no, these are things we're going to put at retail. And there really was a hesitancy to go further into the library. And I saw this as really money being left on the table, but more importantly, that the fans weren't being served with the content they wanted. Jerry and I both know that they were very hungry to want it all. We always wanted to bring Looney Tunes into Warner Archive. We dipped our toe in the water a little bit on the DVD side several years ago with the Porky Pig 101 release, which had basically no budget. And we acknowledged that it was a flawed release in many ways, but we did the best we could under very difficult circumstances. A lot of inventory information that we had was inaccurate, and we did the best we could, and it still ended up being a good seller and entertained a lot of people. I think that's the most important thing. These animated films, I almost don't want to call them cartoons because that takes on a thought in people's minds of children's entertainment. And as Jerry and I have been saying for decades now, these are short animated films that were made to be shown in theaters to adult audiences and appropriate for children as well. And they were shown in theaters basically from 1930 until 1969. Jerry, am I accurate on that?
Yes, you are.
Because the last years kind of faded away. So I didn't know what the cutoff point was. But the point is that I always tried to say, wait a minute, these need to be treated like great American filmmaking. And this goes back to my earliest days in the home video business, when days of VHS and Laserdisc and so forth and so on. And through all of that, I reached out to Jerry because he is the expert, knows all this back, up, down, sideways. And the two of us together, I felt, could approach this material and make it available in such a way that it could make an impact. And so first that was done when I was at MGMUA. We did video cassettes that were marketed towards adults. They weren't for moms and kids. Hugely successful, the Cartoon Movie Stars series. Then on Laserdisc, we did the golden age of Looney Tunes. I don't think we even called it Volume 1 because we didn't think there'd be subsequent volumes. There ended up being 5. And as that came to an end, Turner Broadcasting was purchased by Time Warner, and the whole Warner Brothers library was reunited under Warner Brothers at that time. And that meant that from 1997 on, all the Warner Brothers cartoons could be rightfully marketed together. And yet it was 6 years in between that happening and what ended up being the first DVD release of Warner Brothers cartoons, which is in 2003 with the Looney Tunes Golden Collection. And you might say, well, what happened in those 6 years? Well, it was a huge battle because it was the quote-unquote kids team marketing leader that was wanting to put these out as kids product. And I'm on the other side going, no, you need to be catering to the adult collector. Right. And what we ended up was a compromise. We had a gorgeous set. Jerry and I had mapped out 10 sets for DVD to be released every year. And they would be comprehensive. They would have special features. They would be presented to the adult audiences. And then a reduced version therein would be marketed with less content at a lower price for the moms and kids at Walmart. And the strategy was incalculably successful. And of course, we had to have controversy. So that first volume of the Looney Tunes Golden Collection, people were freaking out that 2 main cartoons weren't on that set. And there was a reason behind that, in that we wanted each volume to have strength. And of course, there ended up being 6 collections. And unfortunately, by the time we got to the 6th, that was when the home video market started the physical decline of the home video business. At retail, the closing of stores like Tower and Suncoast and Virgin, and that limited the ability to have the hundreds of thousands, and I'm not exaggerating, units that we were selling on DVD of these collections. And the universe of consumers started to shrink. Then came the Platinum collections. And my involvement with this always was somewhat advisory and tertiary, because my role here until the formation of the Warner Archive was theatrical catalog marketing. Even though these cartoons were made for theaters, this was always in the kids' team. But they brought me in, and I made sure Jerry was a part of it from the beginning because they knew I knew the content. So we would suggest, and we worked with others here, and we're very proud of those releases. The Platinum collection was to bring them to Blu-ray, and that was kind of, I'd say, 4 years into the format. And there was new controversy, of course, because we wanted to have things that were new to Blu-ray. We also wanted to have things that had not been on DVD, so there was some kind of scarcity. There really has been a sensibility all along of there is no way to please everybody. And that is a through line for any kind of fan-specific content, whether it be live action of a specific genre, or whether it be these animated films, or whether it's a specific television series or a kind of television series. If you have super fans, you're going to run the risk of finding someone out there that will not like what you've done. And our goal is, most importantly, we have to create a release that is profitable for the shareholders of the company and that will be enjoyed by the people who purchase it and put it on their shelves. And the entertainment value of each release, I think, we can stand behind. And the most recent iteration is what we have now, Looney Tunes Collector's Choice Volume 1. And we were brave in saying Volume 1 because the only way there will be Volumes 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, and maybe they could even be multi-disc volumes, is how this set performs. I went out on a limb and said, I truly believe that we should be making all the Looney Tunes available to the best of our ability, because there are people who want as much as they can get. And I think that there is a larger group of people that we work with that aren't as familiar with how popular these films are with audiences. So the more we have success, that's how we were able to do additional volumes of Tex Avery. Was the first volume was a great success. That led to subsequent volumes. If you have success, you can build on the success. And so the goal here, and Jerry, pipe in if you have any comment on this, was to find a collection of 20 cartoons on a disc with a diversity of characters being represented from really the 40s and 50s, and hopefully content that was very hard to find. Most of these cartoons on the collection were not even available on DVD. Some of them were only available on VHS or Laserdisc. Certainly none of them had been on Blu-ray before. So it was my thinking that this unique combination of titles, and I had some suggestions, but it was basically that Jerry who came to me with, this is how we should start. And that's exactly what we went with. So I have to thank him for coming up with what I believe to be a just voraciously exciting group of 20 Warner Brothers animated short subjects.
I haven't said much, mainly because, wow, I loved your story. You're talking about, how far back you went. I'd kind of like to give a little bit about my background with you and about how, and then it'll end talking about this new set. Like you, we both started in the world of way, way, way back when. Oh my God, I'm not even going to mention the years, but decades ago in the universe, way before home video. Actually, George and I grew up watching the cartoons on TV, like anybody else.
In New York.
And Bugs Bunny. And we both grew up into being big fans of these cartoons. In my case, when I became a teenager and I would come home and do my homework and have Bugs Bunny on in the background, I suddenly was beginning to get jokes I never got before. As I'm working, I'm suddenly realizing how funny these cartoons are and how really well done they are and how well drawn they were, how animation, I didn't understand it, but I was able to comprehend. I could tell a Chuck Jones cartoon from a Bob Clampett cartoon, and it was pretty amazing. So I pursued that. As part of my life, being a film buff. I ended up at United Artists, and I ended up working for their 16 millimeter division to do rent the cartoons and all the features that MGM UA had at that time. One of my, I know people can't see it, but I have here the very first thing I ever did, which was this cartoon catalog that I put together. I curated all the little collections and we published a little catalog to go out to our customers about what cartoons you can rent in 16 millimeter. And then home video came in, and people began to seek me out to help put together some of those things. George, do you remember? I don't know if you weren't there yet, I don't think, but I was involved with putting together something called MGM Cartoon Magic, Volume 1.
I was just an avid consumer on that side. I had not been in the home video business yet. And MGM did that first volume under your direction. And I think there was something else that you did.
There was. It's very famous. It never came out. It was the...
Oh, yes.
which was almost the equivalent of our Popeye the 40s Volume 1, because it was mainly they wanted me to pick color cartoons. That was like a mandate. So I literally picked the first ones, from the 40s. And then, of course, that hit a wall with our friends at King Features. 30
it's a little digression, but I remember going to Video Shack in New York City, which was like a really huge video store on 49th Street and Broadway, and seeing up on the wall coming attractions, Best of Popeye Volume 1 MGM UA, and I was so excited about that. It never came out, and I ended up at MGM UA Home Video after working at a competitor in the non-theatrical business, company called Films Incorporated, competitor to MGM UA 16, who were then UA 16, because when I started at Films Incorporated, the non-theatrical rights to MGM were still at Films Inc., where they were from 1956 till January 18th, 1982. Not that I have a memory for those things. But the important thing is, in terms of Popeye, when I did arrive at MGM UA Home Video, my first day I asked a whole bunch of questions because I was hired to be their director of programming. And I said, what about the Popeye cartoons? And they showed me how the original contracts for the cartoons did not allow for home use. And King Features, the owner of the character, basically gave a cease and desist to MGM UA. And MGM UA demurred and didn't fight it because they probably said, oh, it's a bunch of cartoons. People who don't have the knowledge or aren't illuminated to the importance of these works, they just say, it's just other cartoons. Well, that wasn't my attitude, and it took me, let's say, 10 years at MGM and 8 years at Warner Brothers until finally we were able to make a negotiation with King Features to pay to get the home video rights for the Popeye cartoons that we own, the 231, I believe, theatrical cartoons made for Paramount distribution between 1933 and 57. And we now have those rights in perpetuity and cleared. King Features was very happy. We were very happy. That was a very successful, it just took patience because it finally took someone at King Features to say, hey, we understand this. But going back to my involvement with the Warner cartoons before coming to Warner Brothers, when I was at Films Incorporated, I was hired out of there from college. I was doing non-theatrical for about a little less than a year. And then the opportunity to become the national sales manager for their repertory theatrical division opened up. And I was about 21 at the time, and they wouldn't give me the job because they said I was too young. And I said, don't hold my age against me. And when I started there, we had 100 films under license for 20th Century Fox to service in 35 millimeter. And within a few years, we had gotten the entire Fox library, the entire Paramount library, 35 millimeter for repertory distribution. And I approached Warner Brothers for the Warner Brothers cartoons to be shown in theaters, revival theaters and programs that I put together, that I said, we can get a percentage of the house and earn big film rental. And going back to the beginning of cartoons being in theaters, they never really were a source of big money. No. They were primarily rented for very low cost. The idea that you could put a group of cartoons together fill a repertory theater and get 35% of the house, suddenly there were hundreds of thousands of dollars being made with cartoons. And people are looking at me cross-eyed saying, how are you doing this? And we went from doing it 16 millimeter theatrical to making new 35 millimeter prints. And then Jerry and I were talking, I believe, sometime it was before the film forum. I reached out to Warner Brothers to have new 35 millimeter prints made on black and white Porky Pig cartoons.
Right.
And we did a thing called Porky Pig in Hollywood at the film forum. And it got reviewed in the New York Times. And the repertory business kind of fell off a cliff. I sent my resume over to MGMUA because I was dying to work for that company. And it took a long time for them to actually start me, even though at the first interview they said they wanted to hire me. And when I finally did start there, my attention was drawn to various things, but one of the chief motivating factors was the animated short subjects in this amazing library. Mm-hmm. And that led to the company moving from New York to Culver City, as did I. And Jerry was already out here, and we started the Cartoon Movie Stars on videotape, and then the Golden Age of Looney Tunes Laserdisc series, which was very successful. There was also the Complete, and we were subject to certain censored masters that Turner supplied MGMUA. The Complete Tex Avery. Right. There was a Happy Harmonies.
Right.
Laserdisc set. We were very proud of those things. They were all very financially successful. And then the Laserdisc business died. Basically, when Turner Broadcasting was sold to Time Warner, that was my cue to leave MGMUA and join Time Warner. This was just at the dawn of DVD, and I had kind of a bifurcated role where I was working with various divisions within Time Warner to teach them about the Turner Entertainment Company library, the pre-86 MGM films, the pre-49 Warner films, the RKO films. And I was working on soundtracks and documentaries and working with Warner Home Video and not part of Warner Home Video, which was really painful for me, although I loved what I was doing. But one of the things I was consulting with them about was, what are you going to do with the Looney Tunes? And when I finally got to Warner Home Video a few years later in a senior executive position, they allowed me to advise, as I was referring to before, on putting these out on DVD. But how to do it was a huge battle because, as I mentioned before, we had colleagues who previously were selling Tuna-Fish and children's toys making decisions about these animated films that were made for adult audiences and families to be shown in theaters. So Looney Tunes Golden Collection began the trajectory of handling these things correctly and with respect.
George, when did DVD emerge? My memory says something like 1998, 99.
1997 was the launch in this country. There was
and the thing is that the Looney Tunes didn't come out on DVD until you were allowed to make that happen in, I think it was 2003. And I think
that's exactly right.
And the reason they did that, partially the reason was it was to help promote Looney Tunes Back in Action, that feature that came out that year.
Yes.
And I also remember another thing about that. And again, I don't know this absolutely, that we had to use some cartoons that were already mastered in high def or something, or for DVD, like the Tweeties that they were put out in Europe or something. And wasn't there something like Japan? And so that's one reason why there's a lot of Tweety cartoons on there and that kind of thing. I want to say in my chronology of this, I did something without George. I think, George, remind me, somewhere around 1999, 98.
Columbia House?
Yes. I was involved with the Columbia House. I curated something like 15 to 20 volumes of these little VHSs with like 10 cartoons, 12 cartoons each. And I tried to do some clever things with that. And we did all the directors, we did certain, ones that were exclusive characters, and we did mix-ups, and it was fun. And we tried to put out a few things that weren't released otherwise, but it was, it wasn't what we could do with George at the helm. We did what we could. That was one of those things. It was just frustrating. It was just very frustrating. I was dealing with people on the other side there who didn't understand what I was trying to do. They let me ultimately have my way. If anybody has those, rare VHSs, I think they're collector's items now, especially if they're sealed. And then the Golden Collections, as you said, we designed like 10 of them.
Right.
I remember that when we got to like number 5, they basically told us it's over. And I remember that you, George, went in and we fought. I'm going to say we, but you really fought for at least one more volume because we had so much good stuff that we wanted to put out. We had documentaries that we had already filmed, that hadn't come out yet. We had this beautiful number 6 pretty much ready to go, and we got that out. It's weird. It's just there's been dry spells, and then it's feast and famine. With the cartoons. My goal, as you mentioned before, it's the goal of all the fans out there, is we want all of these cartoons out. We want them in the best possible quality. We want to be able to enjoy them when we wish to enjoy them, meaning the way you can with physical media. And, I'm excited about that. I mean, the fans may not be following it the way we've seen it from our point of view, but George created Warner Archive collection and didn't have access to the classic cartoons. Wasn't able to touch them. We still don't have Tom and Jerry. We're not touching on this stuff because we don't have it. We don't have it to do. We stuck our toe in the water with Porky Pig, and again, that was an attempt to put out stuff that the main company wouldn't. That's really been our thing. Actually, if you think about it, we put out the stuff the bigger company won't. Porky Pig, some of the Hanna-Barbera titles. Johnny Cypher, I shouldn't mention that one.
Well, but that was a personal favorite to you, and because of how it was done, it was profitable.
Was it? Oh, wow, I'm excited about that. Good. The archive is vast and deep, and there's still a lot of little hidden gems in there, that we hope to get our hands on to do. And right now, the bigger fish to fry are the Warner Brothers cartoons. People constantly ask me, since we started doing them at all, the Popeyes. When are you going to finish the Popeyes? When are you going to do more Tex Avery? I get that all the time. Our thing has been to do what's the priority. What can we do that's the biggest fish that we can put out that the fans want? That's more important than sometimes finishing something we may have started. I want to finish doing what we're doing now with Warner Brothers because I envision one day in the future that may never happen, where all the cartoons, all the Looney Tunes are available at whim to the fans, to people.
I have to share a funny memory, and that is when DVD was on the horizon, but it was clear to me. I knew what the discs were. They were 5-inch discs, like a compact disc. Right. I had no idea what the packaging was going to look like. So I was envisioning CD jewel cases lined up on a shelf of Looney Tunes Merry Melodies, Volume 1, 2, 3, 4, to go from the first to the end. I was picturing it in my mind. There was one executive here who had the oversight of DVD before launch. And I went into his office, and then they showed me the infamous Snapper packaging that had been designed by Warner Home Video that was adopted by the industry and then dropped by the industry a year later, except for Warner Home Video. But I was seeing these jewel cases all lined up next to each other of all the cartoons. Mm. And I wish that had been possible. I wish it still was possible. But instead of looking at the glass half empty, I'm looking at the glasses half full. Yeah. Because this series of releases could end up being more than just a single disc, could end up being a 2-disc set or a 3-disc set for Volume 2, volume 3. There could be many more volumes until we get as many cartoons out as possible. And also we can address some of these painful issues that have been technologically and just realistically challenging, in that these cartoons, many of them were reissued 7 years after they were made, or maybe twice. And Jack Warner, in his infamous desire to save money, decided that by taking the credits off the cartoons, and he came up with the blue ribbon titles, or somebody did, they would just have a single title card of a cartoon cut into the original negative instead of the beautiful artwork and crediting the people that made the films. And there was a horrific bastardization, I would say, of hundreds of cartoons. And that's how we saw them on television. So, giving credit where credit is due, there was an initiative starting with the Golden Collections to try to find 35 millimeter nitrate prints that were from the original release. And we have been successful in restoring main title cards for dozens of cartoons. That still leaves open the fact that, Little Orphan Airedale, which is one of the 20 cartoons on Collector's Choice Volume 1, has a blue ribbon card. Now, usually we go to where our nitrate studio 35 millimeter prints are on deposit, which is UCLA, who has been an archival partner of Warner Brothers and Nitrate since 1979. We will borrow the studio print. If the studio print is a reissue print, we're SOL. But that doesn't mean that we stop there and we look elsewhere. We're continuing that fight, as we also hopefully will be doing for the MGM cartoons, because they suffered a similar fate and had their titles changed and content changed. Yep. It's a whole other issue, and I don't want to get off topic.
And the thing is, it's really important for people to understand is that we, and I'm going to say also you, George, this whole thing about titles, I feel like sometimes I'm the guy who invented it. I'm the one who, when I did my books way back in the 80s, went to UCLA Archive. I got to see some of the cartoons, like Book Review is one of my favorites. I asked to see the print because maybe they had some other aspect to it. I got a chance to see it. And they showed me a print of it and had the original titles. Now, by the way, that's freely available now thanks to the archive and our efforts. But that's when the light bulb went off in my head. I started writing articles about original titles. They were lost. They were not there. They're only here. Dare I say it, at risk of being edited, if it were up to the studio, you'd never see any original titles. It's because of George. It's because of our efforts with on DVD. Every time we put out a set, the cartoons are restored. And in our case, if we know there's original titles to be, restored to that film, we do that. You're seeing them on TV and elsewhere with original titles these days. That's only because we did it. We did it first. If we didn't, no one would have. So that's one of the reasons that supporting what we've been doing all through the years has been, that's how the fans have helped, by supporting what we're doing.
And I do need to mention the role of Warner Brothers preservation team. My colleagues, some of whom I've been working with for many, many years, we have an extraordinarily talented group of archivists who work on the preservation of these films. And preserving means trying to seek out original titles. And so part of that process is my colleague in preservation reaching out to UCLA and saying, hey, can we borrow this print? And then going further and reaching out to Museum of Modern Art, George Eastman House, other archives within the country. And occasionally there have been collectors who are friendly with Jerry, who've been unabashedly generous in sharing their private prints. And I think it's very important to point out that many, 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 many years ago, long before Jerry and I were around, studios looked upon collectors as pirates. And nothing could be further from the truth, speaking from a contemporary standpoint. And I'm talking about for the last 25, 30 years. Once home video came around, people who collected film prints were not a threat. And if it weren't for the generosity of certain collectors, there are some feature films that we wouldn't have the missing footage for. And many people have been unselfish in sharing what they have with us. And this is just a word out to any collector who feels that if they come forward and say, I have this print, that they think they're going to get in trouble from the studio. No, it'll be just the opposite, that you will be granted with gifts and whatever else is necessary to help us restore, because of the casual nature of our predecessors not taking proper care. We are dependent on collectors, not just for film elements, but for stills and posters and all sorts of things that were not retained in an era when people weren't thinking about the future.
So then you go about picking 20 for this collection. Did you go back to some of your old notes, Jerry, of some of the collections that you weren't able to finish? And you're like, George, I'm going to look at my research, remind myself what those are. And these are some of the top ones. Is that kind of how that process starts, Jerry?
That's how it starts. Yeah, these definitely would, if we had somehow been able to do more platinums or golden collections, we would have gotten to these cartoons. I believe one or two had some issues, where there was some negative damage and things. And sometimes we would take the cartoon that didn't have the negative damage and go with that. So we held off a cartoon or two. That kind of thing would happen throughout the years. I do want to mention, I got to mention our good friend Devin Baxter, who was my sounding board person that I consulted with. We went over what cartoons hadn't been out, what cartoons are ones that fans are talking about. Obviously, we're living in a world today of chat boards and Facebook groups and things like that. So there's a lot more chatter, a lot more fans who have their say. We have our ear to the ground. And these were them. I mean, I was personally interested in seeing, for example, if we had any Chuck Jones cartoons that we hadn't put out. Because I know
Beanstalk Bunny was one you and I both said immediately, we have to solve this.
Yes.
Now, one of the things that differentiates how we approach these cartoons now versus how we approached them 10, 20 years ago is, until the last few years, going back to the original negative was basically verboten. The only way they would do that is if the negative went to a film lab and a new interpositive was made. And so you're losing a generation. And that's how everything was done. Now, when we go back to the original successive exposure negatives, which are a very unique, fascinating process that was used for Technicolor, we go back to these successive exposure negatives, scan them at 4K. That's the raw scan used for preservation. And Beanstalk Bunny is a result of that. And I think it's also important to point out that this release got delayed by almost a year because we wanted to put on Catch as Cats Can. That was a specific request of Jerry's. And we needed the original negative, which is stored at the Library of Congress. Most of our pre-48 cartoon negatives, at least the color ones, they are at Library of Congress. And you can't ship nitrate when it's hot out for obvious reasons. So we were a little too late getting that sent out last year. So we had to wait until the winter of 2022, like November, to get that negative. And so that's why this release, which I had intended to come out last fall, it ended up coming out May 30th, and it was still quite a squeaker. But these are examples specifically of how one cartoon can hold everything up. And yet, we felt this was really important, even though it's not that famous a cartoon. The cartoons that aren't quite as famous in many cases have die-hard fans that really, really want them. So trying to please this myriad group of interesting people and make them happy with a really, really knockout presentation, and the colors and the clarity are really unprecedented. And you really get to see the beauty of the backgrounds and the line delineation, and they just look fantastic. And as Jerry said before, the thing that sets Warner Brothers cartoons apart from almost anybody else's, I'd say with the exception of MGM's and Fleischer, is that I think no cartoons as a group were funnier than the Warner Brothers cartoons. And they were also beautifully done in most cases. And that's what you have to see here, 20 different examples of.
I was worried when we got into it. I thought we were going to be picking 20 miscellaneous choices because those are the ones that are the hardest for even us to have programmed in the past. There's only one or two cartoons on here, maybe not even. Maybe there's just one that doesn't feature a star character of some sort. We got Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Porky, Roadrunner. In most cases, we have two cartoons at least with those characters. Tweety and Sylvester, Foghorn Leghorn, the Goofy Gophers, the Three Bears, which were Chuck
Elmer
Jones.
Fudd.
What am I missing here? We've got Babbitt and Costello, which was Frank Tashlin, and the one we have here.
The Goofy Gophers.
And the Goofy Gophers. And we got the one uber miscellaneous one is by Art Davis, who has his own little cult. Art Davis was one of the great animators at Warner Brothers and directed his own unit for about a year or two in the late 40s. And his cartoons are just wild, funny, and they feature a lot of strange, versions of the characters in them. So he's got his own little cult going for him.
I was going to ask you about that because he did Catch as Cats Can. And that's one of the two that are brand new, never released before, right?
Yes, that one and Beanstalk Bunny are the absolute, you don't have those. But some of the other cartoons on the set, the Foxy Duckling, I think, I'm forgetting now. I think Two Gophers from Texas. There's several of the Art Davis cartoons on here, and people can begin to discover his magic. We also have Chuck Jones, Friz Freeling. I said Frank Tashlin, Robert McKimson. So we got a real good cross-section of the directors as well. That's the other thing I like about this, this collection. It's rounded. It's a real variety. You kind of don't even get bored watching it once. You watch, I will say this, except for maybe me and George, if you watch 20 Bugs Bunnies in a row, you might get bored, maybe. Or certainly Roadrunners. If you watch 20 Roadrunners in a row, good luck on that. But watching a collection like this with the different directors, the different characters, different periods of time from the 40s into the 50s, this is great stuff, prime stuff. Nothing from the 60s, nothing from the 30s. It's good.
Again, to be fair, certainly the 30s was a period of great work.
Well, I'm not putting those, neither the 60s too. I actually like
And the 60s, we saw, obviously, there were seismic changes. The cartoon unit was shut down. And then DePatie Frelling leased out the building and made cartoons that Warner Brothers decided to continue distributing. And, they have their fans.
Well, they're part of the whole legacy. So, it's this, I could minutely go into those cartoons and point out what's good about them, but on the whole, there's some that aren't so good. I will admit.
Well, the most important thing is to make them available to the people who want them.
Yeah.
That was the basic mission statement of the Warner Archive when we started 2009. Make things in our library available to people that want to own them. Getting them mastered, getting them legally cleared. Legal clearance isn't as much of an issue in terms of music and so forth and so on the cartoons.
Every
But
time we do one of these, I feel like we've released it. We've gotten it back from the dead or something, and we've released it, and it's alive forever at this point. I felt that way about restoring the Tex Avery's. When we recently did that thing where we put the old soundtrack from Crackpot Quail on.
that was amazing.
I mean, now that exists. It didn't exist before, and it's alive and out there. Right now, Catch as Cats Can will now, because of our efforts for this particular set, it will be in the library. It will be a thing that people can see, and it'll be in future on television here and there. We did that. That's what we are doing here. And I'm excited. I'm proud to be part of this.
And there are still an enormous amount of cartoons that need restoration, preservation.
Absolutely.
They're not the most famous cartoons, but in my mind, every single cartoon we have needs to be properly preserved and presented in its very best form.
A lot of cartoons we grew up, we watched them on TV. They were in 16 millimeter. They were fading even at Channel 5. They were X generations away from the originals. And now a lot of those cartoons that I had no feeling about at all, I'm talking about the 30s stuff, the musical things, seeing them restored is jaw-dropping. These are great. They're really great, and they haven't had their due. And that's what we want to bring back. That's what we want to do and get them out. I'm saying all this, and people will give us some applause, but I want to applaud the fans and the consumers who are supporting us doing this. They're doing their part. We're going to make this happen. We all have to work together to do it.
Jerry, I think you've really hit the nail on the head, because this collection of 20 cartoons, it does represent the Warner Brothers cartoon department at its full throttle, all pistons going period, which is in the 40s and the 50s. Certainly all the pistons were going in the 30s, but in the 30s, real character development, starting with Porky and onward, hadn't really taken hold. And the 40s and the 50s, at least to some degree, were the golden age, So we wouldn't use golden age as a term, but Jerry came up with the title Collector's Choice. And I thought that was, as with everything he does, I think it was very inspired and targeted, because that's exactly what this is. This isn't greatest hits. So many of the most famous and greatest cartoons have already been released. They've been available with exceptional good quality. What about all the others? And what is one man's meat is another man's poison. There are some people who love a particular cartoon, and other people just don't have the sensibility to appreciate it. That doesn't make anybody right or wrong. It's just different tastes. But I also believe the beauty of these films is that if you actually show them to an adult who is not enlightened as to the craft of the artwork, the brilliance of the writing, the brilliance of the musical scoring, starting with Carl Stalling, passed on to Milt Franklin, the levels of genius at work here, and what these people put on celluloid needs to be celebrated and honored. And I'm paraphrasing Jerry here, but these films need to be given their rightful place in American cinema. And I hope that what we're doing here helps to contribute to that proper acknowledgement.
I agree.
Well, just to kind of wrap up, the last thing that I wanted to ask you is, part of the title is Volume 1. And if there are good sales and the fans support this, which we hope will happen, what would the future look like of future volumes?
Obviously, we can't promise because we're speaking totally theoretically, but I think we would follow this same kind of mix from different periods, different directors, different characters, different thematics. It's possible that subsequent volumes could have more cartoons. We will make sure that we look high and low to try and find missing titles. And if anybody out there has any, please let us know, and know that your helping us will be incredibly valued and not a threat to your film collection. Jerry and I both proudly have 16 millimeter film collections. And I've had mine since I was in sixth grade. And some of the cartoons I have, I am going to give to Jerry just because they mean a ton to him. They're not Warner Brothers cartoons, but it's been an ongoing joke. I have to do that. And I haven't actually put film in a projector in a shameful amount of years because I go, yeah, I know I have this print, but the discs look so much more beautiful. And we were very content when we were in our teens to have 16 millimeter faded prints of Looney Tunes because there was no other way to own them. Right. Now there is a legal way for people to own these things, and with quality that would be completely undreamable decades ago.
Do you remember, George, that store that was on 57th Street on the west side?
National Cinema.
National Cinema. My first cartoons on 16, I'm going to say it, I bought from there. I bought a dupe black and white print of Buckaroo Bunny, or Buckaroo Bugs, whatever, that one, the Clamp,
right.
Red Hot Rider. And I also bought a Walter Lance cartoon in black and white. I mean, that was how it was so desperate. I think I probably paid $25 for that dupe black and white. I didn't know what I was doing when I did that, but I didn't understand what the prices were or how you could do it. But, we've come a long way from that period. Neither of us can make promises about the next set because we don't know what exactly it is yet. But I will say,
or if there will be one.
We have held out some the very, very, very few Bugs Bunnies that have never been restored. There are one or two more, and we're going to try to get to those. And there's plenty more on the miscellaneous, and I guess I'll leave it at that for now. We are thinking about it. We hope we get a chance to put them out.
Absolutely.
Well, as always, it's just a pleasure to just kind of sit back and listen to you talk and reminisce and, your entire career and your love for the Looney Tunes, but also just all the work that you've done over the decades that have preceded this release. And I really do believe that the interest is just at an extremely high level for this. So thanks again for coming on and talking about this great new release.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
Well, it's always great to have George Feltenstein and Jerry Beck on to talk about animation. And it was especially great to talk Looney Tunes on Blu-ray for the first time from the Warner archive. We didn't go into detail on each cartoon just so that we didn't have any spoilers. However, I have seen all 20 short films, and I think the release is worth owning just for Beanstalk Bunny and Catch As Cats Can. But I also really enjoyed Greedy for Tweety and Little Orphan Airedale, just to mention a few others. So if you enjoy Looney Tunes, I think this will be a great addition to your collection. For those of you interested in ordering Collector's Choice Volume 1, there are links in the podcast show notes and on our website at www.theextras.tv, so be sure and check those out. If you're on social media, be sure and follow the show on Facebook or Twitter at The Extras TV or Instagram at theextras.tv to stay up to date on our upcoming guests and to be a part of our community. And you're invited to a new Facebook group for fans of Warner Brothers films called Warner Archive and Warner Brothers Catalog Group. So look for that link on the Facebook page or in the podcast show notes. And for our long-term listeners, don't forget to follow and leave us a review at iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider. Until next time, you've been listening to Tim Millard. Stay slightly obsessed.